If you've played basketball at a high level in the Northeast over the course of the last 50 years, chances are you've come up against a Reilly. With more than 1,500 wins as a family, Wesleyan's head basketball coach, Joe Reilly, is fast on his way to 500. We caught up with Coach Reilly today to try and understand some of those family secrets at half court. Coach, thanks so much for having us here at Half Court and hosting us. You've been a great friend for Connecticut Basketball and youth basketball across the nation, so thank you very much for having us.
You're welcome. Thanks for the invitation. This will be fun.
So I think the most important question that everybody wants to know is, how is the Reilly family holding up in quarantine? You and Isabel have 4 very active student athletes. How are you guys making it?
Yeah, we're doing great. We're trying to think of all the positives that could come out of it. It's been a good reset. My wife and I do joke that COVID-19 hit exactly the window where we have 4 teenagers under one roof. So there are times that we're really getting a lot of quality time together, and there are times we're really trying to use as much space as we have in the house to get that separation.
So that's great. So this is what we wanted to do. You've had, both as a player and as a coach, you've had a lot of success. But when we looked at your record in your career, both as a player and a coach, there was a process that you went through on both sides. So maybe we can kind of start off as a player. You're finishing your last game as a player. You're finishing your 4th year at Trinity College. You're a 1,000-point scorer. You're in the top 5 or 6 categories on the leaderboard in the history of the school. And the question arises, well, how did you get from here, being a kid playing basketball, to there? Like, when you started off as a kid playing basketball, were you playing in some kind of structured program?
There was no AAU basketball when I was growing up. There was no travel basketball. It was in town, and it was CYO. So started off first organized sport playing soccer, played Little League growing up, did basketball, but it was very seasonal. And I thought I caught the basketball bug. Well, my father was a very successful high school coach, and I caught the basketball bug at summer basketball clinics and playing in the driveway. It was a big day when the hoop went up in the driveway.
Can we go back to, you kind of mentioned that you were playing other sports, and I know at least one of your kids, your oldest Joey, who is headed into his sophomore campaign at Holy Cross. I remember him playing Little League. When did you stop playing the other sports and you just focused on basketball?
Yeah, it was his decision, and as parents, we would guide the decisions and give some feedback, but it was his decision. And he played baseball through the end of 6th grade, and once it went to a bigger diamond and All-Stars was over, he really enjoyed the All-Star experience. Sure. That was fun because there were great coaches in Cromwell. They had some success, and then he did soccer up till 8th grade, and he did not decide that he was going to give up soccer until about a week before he entered into East Catholic.
Wow. So
he was thinking about being a 2-sport athlete at East Catholic, and in August he came to the conclusion, he's like, hey Dad, I want to play JV basketball, and I want to play in the fall as much as I can so I can be ready to have an impact. And the goal was to make JV. And it turned out he had success on the varsity level as a freshman, but that wasn't his goal going in.
Sure. He
just wanted to get better in the fall and focus on that.
To kind of fast forward to your players here at Wesleyan today, I'm assuming that they were not 2-sport athletes in high school or junior high school, or does it run the gamut?
It runs the gamut. I love 2-sport athletes. And for my son, I would explain to him, and we would talk about what's the difference between taking a penalty kick in the last few minutes of a soccer game and having that pressure, than being at the free throw line with a game on the line
Sure.
versus, hey, bases are loaded and you're asked to go to the mound and throw the next pitch to the batter, knowing that you could walk the next guy in and the game could be over and the run in All-Stars could be over.
Sure.
So I think it really translates. Pressure is pressure, and I like the diversification. Joey did not play AAU basketball until 7th grade.
Yeah, a question that we get this question every year from parents, particularly when they're in that, for the boys, on the boys' side, it's typically that 5th and 6th grade year because they're all looking to go play AAU. And the girls on the 7th and 8th grade, when they're in 7th and 8th grade, we see the same thing, that playing basketball is very different from the other sports. So if you stop playing football for a couple months and you're running track and you're lifting weights, you're getting bigger, stronger, faster, and you can still just go hit someone, right? But in basketball, if you stop playing for a couple months, like there's so much precision in the game, particularly in the offensive side. They always ask the question, well, can Mary stop playing for 3? If they're chasing the dream, can the player stop playing for 3 months or 4 months and still excel at the sport?
Very difficult. And I think for the extremely talented, that it's more likely that you could. But and I love 2-sport athletes, 3-sport athletes, but I do think that to be good at basketball, you have to have the basketball in your hands. So if you're out of season in basketball and you're playing another sport, if you're not in the driveway, at the park, in the gym, getting shots up, the game is timing and precision, and those skills I think you have to keep really sharp. So
also, just because you're playing Little League doesn't mean you can't go either. You can't play a couple travel games or kind of whatever. You don't have to completely wall yourself off from it.
Right, you can still do both. I remember one year I wanted to introduce my son Joey to lacrosse. He did lacrosse and baseball in the same season. Now you have to prioritize one, but I wanted him to have that experience, so he had a season of lacrosse under his belt. Because ultimately I think it's good for them to choose, and I think that if you let the process unfold, it becomes apparent what they really love and what they're passionate about. Because they don't want it to be a job. It has to be something they really love to do.
Yeah. So let's go back to that and kind of you as a player. So you head to South Catholic, and then for people who don't know, this was the beginning of the power conferences, right? Where enormous schools, great players, littered with what would eventually be college and professional players are playing at this level. Coach Pannone, who's obviously a great friend of Connecticut Basketball, actually played at South Catholic also. You're going into your freshman year, and you're not 6'5", right? So you're going into that year. What was your orientation? Were you looking to get on the varsity court right away?
No, it was very rare that freshmen rarely, if ever, played. John Pannone, played in the NBA for the Atlanta Hawks before he went overseas and had a great career. But I think in the 20 years before my arrival, my dad was at South Catholic, maybe 3 freshmen cracked the lineup over that course of 20 years. So no, the expectation for me or the goal was, hey, can I practice with the JV to get better every day? That's really what the mindset was.
Yeah, can you also talk a little bit about, because it actually does relate to your coaching tenure here at Wesleyan, like your dad as a coach, and I'll just set it up by saying, like, preparing for this interview, we took a look at some videos of your dad coaching, and he's coaching a championship game in 1974, which in my mind kind of takes me back to the Bobby Knight era of basketball, and coaches behaved a certain way. They definitely were more vocal. There was definitely more yelling and screaming. There's obviously a famous video of Coach Knight throwing a chair across the floor, and that's how coaches were. And then the thing that we were struck by is when we were watching your dad, he was calm as lake water. So now he's coaching in the middle of this era where all these coaches were very different than they are today, but he figured out a way to win 500 games coaching a different way. Can you talk about his approach and his rules and how he was able to do that?
He definitely evolved as a coach, and he would talk to me about his evolution. So he was a Marine. He was at Parris Island, and
as was Coach Knight, by the way.
Right. Yeah. So at West Point, and so he said there was certainly an evolution. I think if you talk to players who played from him in the 70s, he was different than he was in the 80s when I was playing for him. And I think that's a great sign of a coach, is you have to adapt and you have to change. And I think even his parenting changed over the years. But there was a lot of discipline. But he's by far the greatest mentor that I've ever had. Both I can model my life as he was as a father, and as he was a son to his mother, and a husband to my mom. And one thing that he used to always say is that the practices are the time for the coach to be front and center.
Sure.
In the games, it's the players' show. Like, that's where you sit back and you encourage. And yeah, you do have to teach and instruct, but the majority of the instruction, the teaching, happens on the practice floor. And if the attention is on the coach, then something is not right.
Yeah, I want to come back to that. But first, because there's a lot of people watching who are playing for their dad, both on the girls and boys side, and a lot of coaches who are coaching their kids. Did you two have like special rules in terms of when you're in the gym, you're a player, or when you're home, you're Joe Reilly? Did you guys? How did that work?
I think we should have had more rules, because it was challenging. It was a different era, though. No social media, no blogs and chats, and people were into it. But it was challenging, because for me, it was extremely important to me. It was obviously extremely important to him, and there wasn't a lot of separation, because you're going to practice with him and you're leaving practice and games with him. So it was challenging, and I think that for my own son, I never coached him growing up, but my rule is I gave him honest feedback when he asked for it. Okay. And the ground rules were that I was gonna do my best for it to be non-emotional, but if he asked, it was gonna be the truth. There was gonna be no false praise, and there was gonna be no unnecessary constructive criticism, but it would be the truth. And the timing was always determined by him. Now, Joey is wired that he was constantly asking me for feedback. And one thing that I started doing that I felt was great is I started putting my feedback down on paper.
For him? For
him. Because then the delivery was not my emotions. When you read something, the emotions are determined by the reader. My tone of voice, the pace of which I talk, the volume of which I talk, it all can impact the message. So I actually started writing down some feedback after games.
Would you talk to his coach if you thought he was struggling or there was an issue?
No, it was different, because he was coached in high school by my brother, who's my dear friend and I'm close to. But I'm very involved with East Catholic basketball, except for the past 4 years when Joey was there. I was the least involved I'd ever been. Yeah. I never attended a practice, but I constantly, before that, I would go to practices. But when my son was there, I was like, that was the rule. I would go to no practices. And but now that he's in college, I sent a text in October and just checking in and seeing how he's doing. And I just sent a text last week because I had a question about what next year was going to look like. Sure. And I was funny. It's like, wow, the last time I talked to him was October 30th, and now it was June 17th.
Yeah, that's great. Like Doc Rivers does. He at a press conference, he had a short snippet which kind of went viral. We actually send it to the parents every year because he's played basketball at the highest level and coaches basketball at the highest level, and they were asking him about his interaction with his kids' coaches, and his kids asking him to intervene on their behalf with their coach. He's like, absolutely, I'm not going to do that. And that, the process of getting on the court is a process, and the coach wants to win the game. So it's incumbent upon you to kind of figure out like how to make that happen. So even with our fourth graders and fifth graders, we try to encourage them as a league to raise the issue with the coach and kind of so on and so forth. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, playing time is a challenge. One thing I would tell the parents is how many questions are you asking about practice? The majority of the season is spent at practice, not in the games. And everybody has 100% participation in every drill and in every scrimmage. And so I think that there's a little bit too much emphasis put on the games in terms of what my son's role is and how many minutes they're playing. And I think that's a recipe for disappointment. I think that people look for maybe what they're not getting from the experience instead of looking through the lens of what we're getting from the experience.
Yeah.
And what I see in youth sports is that kids grow during challenges and the struggle. And I think parents these days, and myself included, I love my kids so much, and when they're struggling, it pains me, and the instincts are,
It's hard to watch.
and I want to swoop in and I want to fix it. But that's not how it was when I was growing up, because the struggles happened in the driveway or in the park or at a summer camp or clinic where there were no adults, and you just figured it out. So I think you kind of have to talk about the process. Yeah, it is a process, and there is some failures, and that's the recipe for success, right? Multiple failures is the recipe for success, but it doesn't feel good when you're living it.
No, absolutely not. Can we talk about a different kind of growth? Because, we always get the question, again, on the boys' side, we're in their 6th grade, and on the girls' side, on the 7th grade, parents are calling us up and saying, Johnny is bought a pull-up bar to try and stretch themselves out because it's basketball and they want to be taller. And we kind of look at your career, right? You're not 6'5", and you figured out a way to score and eventually become a 1,000-point scorer at the collegiate level. How did you think about that, or would you practice differently knowing that you're not 6'5", and maybe you don't have to score 20 every game, but you got to score 7 or 8 to make sure that the offense is balanced? How did you account for that?
Yeah, well, you alluded to it earlier. To be great at the game of basketball, you have to play a lot, and it's not the attitude is, oh, I have to go to the gym right now. It's I can't wait to go to the gym. What park will the best pickup games be at tonight? And as a point guard, I'm really proud of being a 1,000-point scorer both in high school and in college. But in college, I led the team in assists for all 4 years. And so I think in college, the 1,000 points was more that I was on the court a lot. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't a high volume scorer in college, but I was consistent. But the game is also looking through the defensive lens and also like being a great teammate. And not sharing the basketball is super contagious, but so is sharing the basketball. And I think that's a fun way to play. And that's a fun way to play. And growing up, one of the best things that helped me as a basketball player is that there was open gym in the summers at South Catholic where alumni used to come back. And if you were a younger player, it was the first 20 in the gym and that's it. And as a younger player, a lot of times I just sat and watched. But if there was less than 20, I would be able to play. And when you play with older guys that played at University of Hartford or at Central Connecticut, or Randy Levine played at UConn, and these other guys that were played at New Britain. I remember a guy named Rich Leonard. But these guys are 28, 30-year-old men. They play the right way, and they pass. Like you're cutting to the basket and you're getting the ball, and it's not the way the game transpires. Sometimes is that you feel like you get credit for the more you dribble. Like it's efficiency basketball.
Yeah, you almost try to replicate that here because I've noticed that you'll have alum come back. And I think there's one weekend where your alumni are playing against your kids here. Yeah,
so we have an alumni game, and we do it, and we break down that film, and I'll have a 28-year-old alum who's working on Wall Street diving on a loose ball when my 19-year-old supposedly hungry player is bending at the waist to pick it up. Or Rashid Epps, who's at Goldman Sachs right now, is boxing out better than the 20-year-old who's a week away from the Herb Kenny tournament. So yeah, you can learn. It's the alum, and the alum know what I do with that film. So they're trying to provide. They're taking charges in the alumni game to show the young guys how to play the right way.
Yeah. Just staying here for a second, I want to ask you a very specific technique question. We sat down with the great John Gwynn probably 3 or 4 years ago, and he was talking to the kids, talking about how we practice in the rain and the snow. But specific to this question, now this is a standout player at DeMatha High School, obviously legendary at UConn, and I believe he was the last player cut by the Cleveland Cavaliers. And one thing that he talked about, because he's not 6'5" either, you're actually about the same height, that when he practiced, he actually would work on attacking the rim and changing the arc of the shot. So if he was attacking the rim and maybe he's 5'8" or 5'9", and the 5 is coming out at him, he was actually practicing how to change the shot so that, and him for the goal is always for the ball to go in the net without touching the rim, even if he had to change the arc. Would you work that way, or did you not think about it that way?
No, I did. I think that as a 6-foot guard, one reason why I was able to score as many points as I did is because I was able to get to the line. And I learned that from my Uncle Gene. He was a great free throw shooter. Amazing.
Another 500-win coach in your family, coached at Portland High School for many years.
Yeah, a legend. And coming back to Wesleyan, being in Middlesex County, so many people come up to me and want to talk about my Uncle Gene. And he was just a great coach, great man. I spoke at his funeral a few years ago. And I would hear the stories about when he was playing at Buckley High, and then his high school team went all the way to the Boston Garden to play for the New England Championship back then, and that he was just such a cagey basketball player. He got to the line. So that was ingrained in me, is that you can really score by getting fouled. And the ability to score in a variety of ways around the basket. So I grew up, the three-point line was introduced when I was a senior in high school, and the three-point shot was never part of my game. Okay. I didn't develop that part of my game was not developed. So
I'm not
all
sure
of
you
my
can play that way anymore, but
no, but I think in my college career I might have attempted maybe 25 threes and made 9 of them, or that wasn't part of my game. But finishing off different arcs, using the glass, left-footed layup off a right foot. And when I do the clinics here at Wesleyan with young people, I'm always talking about creative finishes, and that's one way you can really score, because that you become a better shooter if you can attack a closeout and you can score in the mid-range and all the way to the basket.
Before we move to coaching, kind of one more question from the perspective of the player around leadership. So you're a senior captain at South Catholic. You were the captain of the team your junior and senior year at Trinity College. Can you talk a little bit about what actually works as the field general who's on the court, right? And what doesn't work? How should you be, what are the expectations of your leader? What can they do to help the cause while they're on the court?
Yeah, the players drive the team culture more than the coach. I mean, the coach can direct it. I think a coach not paying attention to the culture can guarantee there's a bad culture. But no matter what you do as a coach to have a great, healthy culture, if you don't have the buy-in and the leadership of your seniors and your captains, then you're not going to get that great culture. It's really, culture's player driven in so many ways. Now it does start at the top, but it's required by the players. And I think as a coach you have to talk about it, and you have to do leadership training. You have to do, that's a big part of what we do at Wesleyan, is we talk about leadership a lot. And the type of student athlete we get at Wesleyan, everybody's a leader, but
sure.
there is a hierarchy, and everybody has a voice, but there are certain things that there's a progression, and you have to, you have more of a say when you've been invested in the program longer. That's just how it is.
And through the process.
Right. Right.
Yeah. It's interesting because Coach Mike Coase talks about the same thing, and he would tell you that some of the best teams he's ever had were the ones where the leaders were in the drill and they wanted to win everything. Everything was a competition. They're measuring they could be in half-court Tennessee and they want to score more, they want to get more baskets than the players that are on the other side of the gym.
Absolutely, and the competitive drills in practice, and all players are wired a little bit different,
sure.
And they all have a little bit different personality. But the players that I enjoy coaching the most, and I enjoy all my players, is I try to make everything competitive. But as a coach, sometimes practice gets a little slow, you get a little technical. But the minute there's a competitive drill, those guys are clapping their hands and they're like, all right. And I'll even do pickups. I do speed drafts. I get 2 guys out and I say the drill. I want to know what they're thinking about, who has great strengths and weaknesses, and I'm like, all right, speed draft, first pick, second pick, third pick, fourth pick, and it's just, and then all of a sudden, all right, black shirts, red shirts, let's go, jump it up. So it's fun. One
thing I hear you say all the time, whether you're talking about a leader or on the team or just another player on the team, I will come up to you and I'll say, how's X player doing? And you always say the same thing. You're like, he's great, but he needs to play more, right? What do you mean when you're saying that? Are you saying that you just need more reps because it's like a jazz musician, right? You see more fact patterns and your creativity grows and you're able to improvise better? Or are you saying they need to go work on their drop step or their crossover, or like, what do you mean when you say that?
I think it's a little bit of both. So part of the development is every player that I have coming here has had a great level, high level of success at the high school level, and now they're coming in at the bottom of the ladder again, and they're working their way up, and they have to rededicate themselves to really working on their game when nobody's watching. That's a big, like the self-improvement happens a lot when nobody else is watching, and you're driven from within. But a lot of times at the college level, you have players who are going to be great, and you know they're going to be great, but just they're even, or they're just behind this veteran guy who's really, really good.
Sure.
And so there's always a player in my rotation who goes in and they're going to go in for 3 minutes, and if they make 2 mistakes, that 3 minutes might shorten. Mm-hmm. But if they do 2 or 3 great things, I might expand those 3 minutes. And that's on every team I coach. That happens if you're 8th, 9th, 10th man. That happens. And that's a lot of pressure. Whereas if you're a freshman and you're going out there and you're guaranteed you're going to play 22 minutes and you're going to be able to play through the mistakes and get in the rhythm, because that's what you're used to in high school for the majority of our guys. That's what I mean by hey, they got to be out there and get comfortable. But unfortunately, it's, we're trying to win games, and it gets competitive, and you're going to have to work through those mistakes in practice, because you can't make too many of them in the game, because a lot of these games, 2 or 3 possessions is a huge swing.
Yeah. Let's shift gears a little bit, kind of go over to strictly the coaching side of it. And the first thing that we thought was interesting was you actually, after you finished your career at Trinity, you didn't go into coaching right away. You went up and got your MBA in Rhode Island. Like, was it hard being away from basketball for those years?
It was. So I was an economics major at Trinity, and I did an internship at Aetna in the Fidelity Bond Department, and I had a job offer coming out of my summer internship, and I held it off as long as possible, and I eventually said no. Okay. And that was a very difficult decision. 1991, a lot of my friends were looking for jobs. My mom was like, "Oh my gosh," she just wanted me off the payroll and wanted me to have some stability. And my dad was really discouraged me to go into coaching right away, because he didn't want me doing it just because he was a coach and because I love the game of basketball and I was familiar with it. So I said, okay, I will do something on the business side of sports. So I did,
So was that your original plan? Or?
Yeah. So what I did is I worked for a nonprofit sports marketing company for a year in just an intern stipend position. And what I did, and that was in Rhode Island, and every lunch break, I wouldn't take lunch. I'd go play pickup basketball at URI. Okay. And then I got friendly with a GA who was working for the athletic director. We were playing pickup, 3 or 4 times a week. And he's like, "I'm leaving. I'm going to talk to the athletic director. If you're interested, it's a great deal. You can work for the AD, and you can get your master's for free." So I said, "Hey, I'll do that." So I was in the AD's office, and so I did that for the next 2 years. Got my MBA for free, and I worked in all different areas of the URI athletic department. So in Atlantic 10, I wasn't doing basketball. I was in the ticket office. I was in sports information. I was in recreation and club sports. I got in intramurals, and I got a whole look at the operations of a Division I athletic department. And then after 2 years, I called home and said, "I know I want to coach." And I made a list of 30 coaches in New England who I knew, or my dad knew really well, or my brother knew. And I didn't have a cell phone then. There was no internet. And I drove and I met with all 30.
You know what? That's actually a great, even in today's internet era, like just the sort of getting a job and kind of figuring out, all right, well, what are my contacts? I'm going to go, the universe of my contacts, like how am I going to go find an opportunity? But that opportunity came at Yale. So was Coach Jones there when you started? He was not. Steve Peichel was an assistant coach, and another great coach, Michael Mucci, who went to Haverford in Philadelphia and had a very good career there for 20 years. And it was very funny how it happened at Yale, because I met all these 30 coaches and I was hitting dead ends. And I was back in the Mackle Fieldhouse right next to Keeney Gym at URI,
and I'm playing pickup basketball. Al Skinner's the coach of URI, and Bill Cohen, who's the coach of Northeastern, was playing pickup basketball that day, and Tim O'Shea, who just retired from Bryant. And I'm there, and they're like, well, what are you going to do next year? And I'm like, well, I've met with all these guys, and Tim O'Shea was an assistant at Yale, and he goes, there's a spot open at Yale. Come up to my office. I'm all sweaty, dripping in sweat. And he goes and dials the phone, and the head coach, Dick Kuchin, picks up, and he goes, I have someone that could be your volunteer assistant next year. I've got to know him for the last 2 years.
Great opportunity to disguise his hard work.
And he hands me the phone, and I talk to him, and then I go to interview, and Steve Peichel, who I competed against, South Catholic and St. Paul's were in the same Catholic conference, and Steve, legend at UConn, was there, and he took me under my wing that first year. He left after my first year, to be the interim coach here at Wesleyan. And then James Jones replaced him. Oh. And then so I worked with James Jones for 2 years.
Yeah, it's actually a great metaphor because it's like what you coach. And it's what we're trying to teach by playing this game, like resiliency, right? Like we weren't walking into a job. And quite frankly, it sounded like a lot of doors were kind of closing. And it's like what we coach is keep going, keep playing. Something will break through. We talk to the kids about there's something to learn from every season, every game, every practice, and hopefully every drill if you're thinking about it the right way. And when we talk to coaches, we like to talk to them about, well, what did you learn at this coaching spot? What did you learn at that one? What did you take away from Yale that you kind of that influenced how you coach going forward?
Well, the first thing to take away from Yale was just what an amazing place it was. I mean, walking through the airport wearing your Yale shirt was a different experience that I have never experienced since then.
Because the network is just
enormous. Unbelievable. I mean, you're wearing something that says Yale on it, and people are coming up to you, and people really gravitate to you. The Ivy League is, the premier academic destination. So that was really fun. I just really enjoyed the relationship with the players, and I could sit back and you're always, as a great assistant coach, you're 100% loyal to the head coach that you're working for. But if you're wired to be a head coach, I think you're always kind of keeping that notebook and that coaching journal on the side and saying, well, if I am ever lucky enough to get my chance, this is how I would like to do it. And but I just learned, like Dick Kuchin was the head coach there. He coached head coach at Cal Berkeley for 7 years, and he was an assistant for Digger Phelps at Notre Dame during the Kelly Tripucka era. So he was in big time basketball. And then with Steve Peichel and James, you're just constantly learning. And an AD came in, Tom Beckett. He was from Stanford as the associate athletic director, and even as a volunteer, my goal, I was the first one there every morning. I was the last one to leave. I attended every meeting that was I volunteered to be on every committee. I was just soaking up everything, and I was amazed at Tom Beckett's leadership style as he came in. And I didn't really know what the department was before he got there, but watching him create the culture within the athletic department, it was fascinating. So you're trying to learn and trying to grow, and it was really fun.
Yeah. So your next stop was at Bates. And the thing that's interesting about, I believe it was 11 years at Bates?
11 seasons, yes.
The last 5 or 6 were tremendous, but it didn't start that way. And now this is your first opportunity to drive the car. You're running a program, you're the head coach, and you're finishing with 3 wins. Can you talk about that season and what you learned there and that process?
Yeah, I learned a lot that first season. I mean, we might have been the worst team in Division III basketball in New England. So we were 2 possessions away to be in 1-23. That was a very difficult year, and I was the 5th coach of the 90s. I was hired in 1997, and I was the 5th head coach of Bates basketball. And there was a whole chain of events that happened, but no continuity. And every time there's a coaching change, you lose a recruiting class.
Sure.
So I'm the 5th coach in 1997. There really wasn't a recruiting class that was put together, so I had to start from scratch. And I learned a lot about patience. I remember it was a long season, and
it's probably even a harder season to coach than all the other ones. I don't think you've actually, as a player or a coach, you've never had a season like that before.
It was tough. It was really tough.
Do you question? We're always coaching the kids that listen, the opponent that you're battling every day of your life is yourself. Like, did you, because you're battling the self-doubt, like, did you question whether you were doing it right? Because you're just getting started as the head coach.
Yeah, and you know, you're not only are you one of the worst teams in New England that year, but you're in the best conference in New England. I mean, and we're getting beat by 50. Like, it's not. And even at year 3, I remember it was a quick Thanksgiving break. I'm in Connecticut for 48 hours. I'm telling my brother, it's like, I want to be in a position to be close enough to be in the game with 4 minutes to go. I'm not even looking. I think the progression is not even to win a NESCAC game, but let's be close. Let's be within striking distance with 4 or 5 minutes left to go. Because a lot of games, you know, you're going in halftime. It was challenging. And
how'd you get through it?
You know, my dad really helped me, because there was one time I was super frustrated. I'm like, man, I think my direct words were like, man, I can't wait for this to be over. This is torture. And he was like, well, you better stop coaching basketball if that's your attitude, because you're responsible for these student athletes. Like, as a coach, you have plenty of seasons left. These guys, you have seniors. This is their last time they're putting on a uniform. You owe them everything. This is, you know, there's only such a short window to play. And I still remember where I was. I was walking on the street with them, and he set me straight pretty good. And after that, like, I never want I've never want a season to end. I never want to you know, not play this game because we don't think we could win it. Like, it's like you got to take advantage of everything, because it's about the athletes. And I think you needed a reset, because as your coach, you're like, oh my gosh, my career record, look at this, I'm 3-21, and when I'm digging myself a hole. You start thinking about yourself, but you got to think about the student athletes under your care.
Yeah. So the story turns around. You go through the process. You finish your last 5 or 6 years up at Bates as winners. You're the NESCAC Coach of the Year in 2006. You're the main Coach of the Year, I think, twice in 2 consecutive seasons. You play for a NESCAC Championship up at Bates. Was it hard to leave?
Really difficult to leave. It was very difficult.
Because you built the thing.
Right, and it was. So, I was hired in July of 1997. I was married May 31st. So. Basically, I got back from my honeymoon with my wife, and it was the old answer machines there, and the red lights blinking, and someone's like, hey, the Bates job open, you should apply for it. And I look at her, I'm like, just jokingly thinking I have no shot of getting it. 3 years of coaching experience, 28 years old. And I joke with her, I'm like, yeah, you want to move to Maine? And then the moving truck is at our place, you know, 6 weeks later, and it's happening. We're heading up to Maine. So it was tough, because it was very emotional. All 4 kids were born in Maine. We had great friends. Bates is a wonderful community, and it was tough. And you know, you're recruiting these guys to go up there, and a lot of times they have great choices of where to go to school. And a lot of times the coach is the determinant. Yeah, the reason they're there. That was a very emotional time for me. It was very difficult. Now, the saving grace that made it easier is that one of my dearest friends to this day, one of my favorite players ever coached, John Furbush, was he played for me, then he was my assistant, and he got the job. Right. And once he got the job, his goal was he was going to put his own personal stamp on it. But he called me up and said, hey, Coach, like, we're friends for life. You're always welcome back. You're going to be deeply connected to this program, and that meant a lot to me. So it wasn't a clean break, and he's done a great job since I left. He has the best record in the history of the program, and went to the Sweet 16 with the team. And I was at his wedding. I see his family and kids, but that connection has made that is a big blessing for me, because I still feel connected to the program.
Sure.
And it's a tough game to coach against them, but I really root for John Furbush and Bates, because it was such an important part of my life there.
So you went from 3 wins to 154 wins. Program gets turned around. 2008, you come to Wesleyan, and the whole thing starts over again. The thing that's funny is that all coaches we talk to say, oh, I had a 4-year plan. You actually apparently had a 4-year plan, but the first year you struggled. Can you talk about that? Like, did you have more confidence when the team was struggling here because you'd been through the process before?
A lot more confidence. Just a lot more comfortable in the process. And you always believe it's going to happen, but you have to catch some breaks. And I know it's about recruiting. And that first year, we had a great recruiting class. And once that recruiting class came in, I said, all right, now we're going to take some lumps, because you're not going to build it at the NESCAC with transfers.
Sure.
And there was an interim coach before I got here, so it's very tough for an interim coach to get a class, because you don't know what your status is going to be. You don't know who you're going to be playing for. And there was a long, drawn-out process for the coach who was there before. So there were basically two classes. There were some good. I inherited some good players, but there weren't solid. There weren't like big classes that you would typically get. So it was all about recruiting. And that class, it was Wesleyan class of 2013. They laid the foundation for all the success here.
2012 was the year that really kind of turned it around. Like the program. Someone who lives in the area, the program was struggling long before you got here. And then you went through those 4 years, and then 2012, things got turned around. So maybe you'd talk to us a little bit about that group, because many of them, their names are up on that leaderboard over there as 1,000-point scorers and kind of all gone on to do great things.
Yeah, that was a special class, and we really invested in them. So they were juniors in 2012, my first recruiting class, and everybody on the team was 100%. The team roster was guys that I recruited, with the exception of one great senior named Jason Mendel, who was a 1,000-point scorer.
He was 20.
He was
2012.
He was a 2012.
Okay.
He was class of 2012, and he was a great culture guy, and also a tremendous offensive weapon. He could really play. But the best part about him is his evolution of how he started to guard, and doing, we don't call them the little things because we think they're the big things, of diving on the floor or taking a charge or getting into deflection. That it was what he was doing when I was looking through that lens of grit and of defense, because he could always put the ball in the basket.
Sure.
That really defined us, and that was fun. We won 20 games, and it was we set the record for most wins, and hosted a NESCAC tournament for the first time in the history of the program, and the place was packed, and it was just a lot of fun.
Can I go back? When you say he's a great culture guy, is it what you were talking about before around leadership, that he's the guy who's at practice as your leader, meeting the expectation that we're going to try and win every drill. Everything we do matters. Like, he's just setting is that what you're talking about? Yeah,
there are a lot of different layers on the court. I think he was that guy on the court, but we had a guy named Greg St. Jean, who's now
great Cardinal.
Yeah, great Cardinal, and now he's coaching with the Los Angeles Lakers, and basketball is just in his, like, he really filled that void. Like, he was in 2012 at practice. In 2012, that was the only year that he was healthy. And he wasn't healthy the whole year, but for the majority of the season he was healthy. And he was that guy getting people going in practice. What I didn't realize, and a lot of times you don't realize until they leave, is that what Jason Mendel really kept guys together off the court. He really did a great job in the locker room.
As a coach, do you know that's going on, or are you just kind of letting it happen? Like, you've given your expectations of him as the leader, or like, are you giving him direction, or is he doing that on his own?
I think a lot of it they're doing it on their own, but we're giving direction. And with Jason, I didn't truly realize it till the void was there when he left. So it was one of those, is that, you call him up after
2013, that was not as successful as the year before.
Yeah, and we really missed it. And I knew we'd miss him on the court. I didn't realize we'd miss him as much on the court. I remember calling him and telling him, it's like, man, like, I know I've thanked you 1,000 times for what you did for this program, but I need to thank you more for what you were doing off the court. And injuries is a big part of it. So Greg St. Jean, he had his second knee surgery, and he was done. And then we had a center who was a great player who got injured. And a lot of times you take two of your best 5 players out of the, and then there's a little too much pressure for Mike Callahan and Shasha Brown. Now they're asked to do a little
Madison
bit.
Tiger.
Yeah. Now they're asked to do a little bit too much. So you gotta win the close games. You gotta have the ball bounce in your direction sometimes. You're going to be in a position to win, but some seasons it just doesn't work out exactly how you want it to work out.
So now you got the program turned around, and now you're cooking with fire, right? By the time you get to 2012. When we look at the last 5 years, they've been extraordinary, both by NESCAC standards and Wesleyan standards. You've qualified for 5 consecutive NESCAC championships. You won the whole thing in 2015. You've qualified for 3 of 5 NCAA tournaments, which has never happened in school history. Your kids are going to Taiwan and London and Ireland to play basketball. and things were really taking off. So I want to go back and talk about what is the foundation of the program? Like when a kid comes to Wesleyan, like what are you thinking about? What do you want them to learn for their 4 years? And then we can talk about what some of your rules are for the program.